Well, hello, Dan. How are you today?
Hey, welcome back to Tech Time Podcast. I'm doing well. I'm excited to talk about all of the technology stories this week, especially Tesla.
Yes,
We've got a
lots
lot
of
to
Tesla
hash out
news.
about. Now, did I hear you're doing a Cub car race tonight with your kids?
Well, it's not a race. They're actually starting to work on the Cub cars. So, my youngest, this will be his last Cub car, and he's got quite a collection. He keeps them on his desk, and every year he names them and puts all his hopes and dreams into winning the trophy.
Cool.
Last year he got second place, so he thinks he's got some pretty good contending going on this year.
If you guys get first, we're going to have to announce it right here, right on this podcast.
Right on this podcast.
Cool. How's everything else going?
Good. We got a little reprieve from the freeze,
Oh,
so
good.
yeah, today was pretty decent. It wasn't too cold. With the wind chill, it was still about minus 20 Celsius, but that's a whole lot better than minus 30, minus 40 that we've been having. So
Also, did I tell you I've got plans to go to Iceland this year?
what?
So
Iceland?
we're
No.
actually doing it in December so we can see the Northern Lights.
Oh,
Uh,
wow.
all of my California friends want to, see the Northern Lights. We saw them all the time growing up,
Yeah.
right? So I was like, I'm over that. But it's the first time I've ever done a vacation where I've gone somewhere colder, you know?
Yeah, the
Hey,
end in the winter. You're
I
going in
know.
the winter.
We're going in July. I don't know. All right, so I see here that you've got an article about Virgin Galactic.
Yeah, so Virgin Galactic has been making history for the last couple of months. Last month, they had the first highest private space flight, and they went up about 80 kilometers up. Maybe they didn't quite hit 80, but I think they did, which is technically outer space. And some people argue that it really isn't because there's still a little bit of atmosphere that's there. But it is, according to, I think it's the FCAA, which determines what is outer space, 80 kilometers up is the limit, and anybody who goes over that is actually an astronaut. So, quotations, that's their title. If you are the pilot, you are now an astronaut, or part of the crew, you are now an astronaut.
Here's what I want to know. What would happen if we put all the flat earthers in this spaceship? Would they believe?
Would they believe,
There's
and
a
would they
curve.
be astronauts? So that's pretty funny. So what actually happened just last week is they call it the first passenger, tourist passenger went into space. And I don't think this technically counts as the first tourist in space, but it was also with Virgin Galactic, which is Richard Branson's baby. And it was Beth Moses, and she's actually hired. She's an employee of Virgin Galactic. So is she really a tourist? I think not. But her job is to be an astronaut trainer and to work with all the tourists who will go into space and improve their experience.
Whoa.
So she had, I think, a couple of minutes once they got up to 80 kilometers to unbuckle, float around, see what it would be like to be a
Whoa.
space tourist, and then they just came right back down. So I don't know, Dan, do you think that she counts as a tourist? Because she wasn't really a scientist. She went up there to, get the feel for what it's like to be a tourist. What do you think?
She's a half tourist, but
You
how
think so?
cool would
Yeah.
this be? I mean, flashes of blowing up are going on in my mind right now. I mean, we think about all the devastating rockets that have been
Uh,
sent up, and
yeah. Yeah.
and even I watched First Man. That's the movie about the Apollo project and
Mhm.
just all the stress that they went through. We have way
Yeah.
better technology now, but I mean, anything could go wrong.
Oh,
So
you're
I
keeping your life
have
in your hands.
I see a note here that it was really cheap to get these first few tickets. Maybe it's because there's a possibility that you
You might
might not come
explode.
back.
Actually,
Yeah.
that's a typo. It's actually
Oh, okay. I'm
$250,000.
like, now that's a cheap ticket. That's like from here to Vegas.
Hey, who wants to go to the moon and maybe blow up on the first ones?
I
So
have a
it's,
question for you,
yeah,
Matt. If the moon were made out of spare ribs, would you eat
I would
it?
eat it. If it was beef ribs with a good barbecue sauce.
Okay, well, $250,000 is a lot more money than $250.
Yeah, that was a typo. So here's some interesting facts. Do you know how many people have gone into space?
I'm gonna guess 18.
More.
Really?
But it still is a very limited amount of people. If you think about all the countries ever since we started space exploration, it's actually a very select and small group of people that have technically achieved space, which is that 80 kilometers above the Earth.
Okay.
So 560 people from Yuri Gagarin, who was the first man to orbit the Earth, up until today, there's only 560 people who have achieved space and orbited the Earth.
Matt, you're so Canadian for knowing that name. I mean,
Yuri Gagarin?
nobody here in America knows that name.
What? We just had a big celebration to just like
Say his name
celebrate
again. Yuri,
Yuri
what was?
Gagarin.
Okay.
First man in space. Come on, it's huge. So, anyways,
Neil Armstrong is.
Buzz Aldrin, and so 560 have orbited, and
Okay.
then you have only 24, so 24-ish people have left orbit and gone further than orbiting the Earth, and then only 12 have walked on the moon. So it's a very limited amount of people. And we're going to see within the next few years actual tourists going up there. Like Justin Bieber is going to go down in history because apparently he's paid his $250,000 years ago and is ready to have his minute to unbuckle and go, wee.
But is this like the time that you paid your $1,000 deposit for the Tesla and then changed your mind last minute? We'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
But
Yeah. If you're Justin Bieber and you're not feeling comfortable about it, oh yeah.
you just pull out. You pull out of that $250,000. One thing I want to warn our listeners about, if they're the ones that plan on going to space, is it can be really hard on your eyes. I've been reading some peer-reviewed articles about people that are having retinal issues now from being in space, and there's something about the zero gravity that just is not good for the retina. So watch out for your eyesight, folks.
You know, that's fascinating that you brought that up because unrelated to the retina, but related as far as eye problems in space, I was listening to Chris Hadfield, who is the Canadian, probably one of the best known astronauts for sure in Canada and probably in the world.
I'm sorry,
And
what was the name of the first person in space again?
Yuri Gagarin. But Chris
Okay.
Hadfield had an amazing story that he was talking about when he was doing a spacewalk. And a
Now, is this
spacewalk,
the guy that did all the cool Twitter posts and Instagrams
yes,
and
yes,
Major
and
Tom guitar? I remember him. He
yeah.
was big deal. Yeah.
Yeah, so even outside of Canada, he was a big deal. Extremely charismatic, super brilliant individual, and he's Canadian, in case those of you who didn't know that. So he was doing a spacewalk. He's in a spacesuit, and he's out there doing some work on the space station, and all of a sudden, something landed in his eye.
What?
So yeah, he said it felt like a sharp piece of dust or something, and now he thinks after talking to ground control that it was maybe light from the sun had reflected
Oh.
oddly off of his helmet and it made his eye tear up. And the problem is when you're in space and there's no gravity, your tears don't drain. So he said when my eye started to tear up, it was like this blur as the tear would go over his eyeball because it's in the drain. And he
Oh.
said all of a sudden he couldn't see out of the one eye because it was just tearing up.
And
And
pooling.
yeah,
Yeah, I'm
couldn't
geeking
wipe
out
it
over
away,
this. This is so cool.
right? So he had this helmet on and he couldn't wipe it away.
Oh
And he's like,
no.
oh, what do I do? And he's like, ground control, I got a problem here. I'm going blind. And then the tears that were stuck to his eye started like traveled over to the other eye. And
Ah.
soon he was completely blind. He
You know
couldn't
what?
see.
I'm gonna change the definition of insanity to having blurry eyes and needing to rub them, but having a spacesuit on. That's the new definition.
Yeah, like you are in the most dangerous environment humans have ever gone in. This
Yeah,
is
you can't
more
take that off.
dangerous. No, you can't. This is worse than being in the middle of a volcano. You are in space, your eyes are tearing up, and you can't see. You have to be able to see to get back. So he said, "What do I do?" And they have this emergency procedure where you purge your air.
Oh.
So basically, you have like this little valve in your helmet, and he said, "That was my precious air. If too much air leaves, I die." Right? Like he is outside the space station wearing only the spacesuit, and he's like, I practiced this move many times, but he said it was the scariest moment I've ever had as an astronaut. Far scarier than blasting off. He's like, we practice blasting off over and over and over again, but here I am on a spacewalk, blind, in the most treacherous, dangerous environment humans have ever gone into, and I have to release my air. And
Well, here's the thing. This is the $1 million thing for us. We're gonna make a movie about this. We're gonna do lots of close-ups on the eye, and we're gonna win the next Oscar.
Yeah, and we're gonna post it on Netflix, and then we won't be able to win the Oscar because Steven Spielberg says no, and that's another thing.
That Buster Scruggs didn't get anything, right? They nominated them a lot. Yeah.
I liked Buster Scruggs. Did you watch it?
Yeah, I forced Dad to watch it too. He liked it.
You forced Dad to watch it. Kind of violent for Dad, don't you think?
You know what? I just did a little fast forwarding when needed.
That's awesome. Well, let's not leave Chris Hadfield in space with blurry eyes. He did eventually purge it, and it pulled all of the tears off of his eyes and purged it out, and he was able to get back in. Hooray, he survived. But dangerous, scary, crazy.
So maybe that'll happen to Justin Bieber or other people when they go up there. It's lots of dangers up there, Matt.
Danger zone.
So speaking of dangerous, what's this Huawei P30 that you have written down here, leaked?
Yeah, so dangerous, the P30.
Well, the Huawei might be dangerous. I mean, we've had a few podcasts going over how they could be spying on you.
Yes, and there will be an update I saw today, so I look forward to that. So let's talk about what's coming out before we get into the stuff that may be a little bit more political. So the P30 and the P30 Pro, which is Huawei's flagship phones that they release every year. So last year they did the P20 and the P20 Pro. The P30 and 30 Pro are to be released on March 26th, so we're coming within a couple of weeks, and it's going to happen in Paris. However, what's interesting, of course, it's leak season just before all the phones are released, and sometimes they're on purpose, sometimes they're not. But this one shows that the P30 Pro's triple camera setup is going to have a 7.8 times zoom.
Great.
That's awesome. So the P20 Pro from last year actually had a 3-time zoom. I was able to use it, and I was blown away because one of my biggest complaints about doing photography with a cell phone is the lack of the ability to zoom.
What kind of things are you zooming in on, Matt?
Spies.
Spying on the neighbors.
I'm trying to see
zoom.
Sputnik's still up there.
This 7-time zoom will help me see things better across the street.
Yeah, I have caught my neighbor watching some things he probably shouldn't have with the window open.
That's funny.
Yeah, so anyways, that's pretty exciting. 7.8 times zoom. And then the P30 is also going to get a zoom, and it's going to get 4.7 times zoom. So even the P30, which isn't the flagship, the best of the cameras that Huawei will have, will still blow anything out of the water that has currently been released as far as zoom. In fact, Samsung, I think, is maxed out right now at 2 times zoom, optical zoom. And even on their new phones, the S10s that they recently released, I don't think they do any better than times 2. So fantastic. 7.8, 4.7.
My gosh.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd like to see if it's grainy, though. You know how sometimes you do a little zoom and it's grain city.
Well, that's usually from the digital zoom, so you would think that the optical zoom shouldn't be grainy. And if they can combine that with what Google's doing on the Pixel 3,
Mhm.
where it's like that enhance function where they take your shaky hand and grab the pixels and kind of fill in the dots. I mean, let's combine hardware with software and make it awesome. Let's do that.
So I was actually wishing that I had a Google Pixel on the weekend. I
Mm.
went with some Canadians up on a rooftop restaurant in downtown LA, and
Yeah.
it was nighttime, and I thought, oh, this is perfect to make an Instagram story. And I pulled out my iPhone SE
Yeah.
and tried to do a little video of the rooftops around me.
Mhm.
Nothing. It was
Really?
awful.
Oh,
And
because it doesn't have night mode.
it does not have night mode, and a girl next to me pulled out her iPhone 10, and it was way more gorgeous on her phone than on mine. And I think the Pixel XL would be even better.
It's so true. Pixels, it's really they don't have the best as far as hardware goes. I think Huawei's got like the best cameras as far as hardware, but Pixels have just they have focused on that software, especially around cameras, and it people are calling it voodoo and witchcraft. You just can't beat the night mode that they've got. So come on, next Pixel. I know you're doing amazing things with just one camera, but can we upgrade it to two?
Or
Everybody
three,
else is doing three, four, six. Like,
honeycomb style, yep.
yeah, like let's just make the best hardware, mix that with the best software, and let's have the best camera phone experience. Let's do that.
Let's do it. And speaking of good experiences, it looks like Microsoft is going to release a new Xbox One
Ooh,
S.
tell me about it.
Yeah, so it's pretty cool. They're finally getting rid of the optical disk drive,
Uh,
which is insane because I remember when they first introduced optical disk drives back when the PlayStation 1 and Sega came out with something around, the year 2000 that had an optical drive. So now 19 years later, we're finally getting rid of cartridges. We're finally getting rid of optical drives.
Blu-rays. Yeah.
Blu-rays, all it's going to be is an internet connection, which is what it should be. There's some advantages and disadvantages, though. The
Yeah, let's
huge
debate it.
advantage, yeah, is it's going to be a whole lot cheaper to buy the system.
Oh.
So right now, an Xbox One S goes for about $299 in the United States, and that typically comes with one game.
Mhm.
People are thinking it's going to be much cheaper than that, which would make me more excited to get one. Um, the other advantage is hopefully they're going to have a big hard drive in there for you to download all of the games that you want, right? That gives them more incentive to give you a terabyte or two in there
Mhm.
to play to your heart's content because you're going to buy more games. It's more profitable for them. So hopefully they'll supplement you a little bit. They're also going to offer a disc to digital program. So that means that if you already have discs for your Xbox One S, you
Mhm.
can tell them and show them, and they will allow you to download the game. So say you already have Red Dead Redemption or Final Fantasy 15, you can just tell them that, and then you can download it, apparently. Um, this is going to be great for the price. However, there is some bad things. There are huge companies that benefit from optical discs, such as GameStop
Oh,
and
yeah.
Walmart and all the other places like Target that sell them.
Mhm.
It's kind of a pull. I remember when I was in high school, I didn't really like going to the mall, but I would definitely go to pick up a game. And then while I was there, I'd pick up some other things. So it's kind of like putting the milk and the bread in the back of the grocery store, right? You're going to buy other things when you're there. If you don't have any games to buy in the store, you're not going to go. So, and it also might make GameStop go out of business.
I'm also wondering about that secondhand market, right? I don't necessarily need to buy the game as soon as it comes out right away. In fact, some of the games that my kids play the most are older games. Like, I don't know if you've ever played Overcooked. It is awesome. That is a great party game. Everybody's a different chef, and you got to run around the kitchen, and you got to make burgers and like fish and chips, and you're like, get out of my way, and it's hilarious. It's an older game, and I could probably find it on sale for $20, or I could go to GameStop and buy a used version of it for $5 to $10.
Oh, that's
That's gonna
cool.
disappear.
Right.
And so, I mean, there's advantages. That secondhand, like if you get tired of a game, you can actually, it's an asset. It's something that you can sell. I don't think you can sell digital
Could sell.
copies of games.
No. No, so that's going to get rid of that. But hopefully it'll bring down piracy a little bit, because if you don't have the optical drive to burn and to copy, it's going to make it a whole lot harder for you to make ROMs to put up on Pirate Bay, right? Or perhaps people will just be smart and connect into their hard drive somehow and
Oh,
extract the
sure.
ROMs anyway. But I
If
think it
you're
would be
tech
hard.
savvy enough to be able to get around whatever DRM they have on those discs, you're going to be tech savvy enough to just hack it right out of the box for sure.
Well, I think we're really finding a new trend. Things are going to go away from the physical, from the ROMs, from the disk, and it's going to go mostly digital, in my
Yeah.
opinion, for the next few ones. And actually, I think that in the future, you're not even going to play the game on a system anymore. You're going to stream it.
And
I
I
think that's the next.
absolutely agree with you, because the amount of data that we need right now to be able to make these games, because they're beautiful games, the graphics, and you need a smoking awesome
Video card,
computer,
ton of
yeah,
RAM.
all the components. And in the future, they could have that smoking system somewhere in a data farm, and all you need to do is stream it. I mean, we're already there. You've got the NVIDIA Shield already has streaming capabilities from any computer with an NVIDIA graphics card.
Yeah.
And, there are services out there. You can already do it. I believe Microsoft and PlayStation both have options where you can stream. Now,
Cool.
due to data limitations, and depending what your ISP's limitations are like, you may not get the same experience streaming the game today that you would if you were actually running it off of a computer with the best gear and equipment. But that's changing. And as internet pipes get bigger and bigger, especially with 5G, it just makes no sense that we're stuck paying $2,000-$3,000 for gaming computers, or $1,000 for a smoking awesome Xbox. So
Agreed.
yeah, I think streaming's the future, but it does cause problems where now you're no longer going to be able to sell your older games. So it gets rid of that market, and the people who want to buy a cheaper game, they'll have to wait for sales and all kinds of issues. But we'll have to see what the market does.
It's going to be more like Steam, but for consoles. The next thing I want to talk about is Canada finally said they're going to allow the U.S. extradition of the Huawei CFO. So she's stuck in Vancouver right now in one of her two huge luxurious homes, right?
Yep.
And the Canadian government said they're going to proceed. Today, the Department of Justice of Canada issued an authority to proceed, formally commencing an extradition process in the case of Meng Wanzhou, the government said in a statement. So remember, she was arrested back in December, and we have a few podcasts about that because of allegations that she violated U.S. sanctions against Iran. So this has really put a strain on the Chinese and the Canadian relationship. Legal experts had predicted that Ottawa would give the go-ahead for extradition, but of course her lawyers are fighting it and saying that it's unfair. Here's the interesting thing, though. It could be years before Meng is ever sent to the United States. So she might actually be caught in Canada for a few years.
Yeah, it's fascinating to see what's happening here. And let's get political on this, because the very day after Canada said, okay, we've cleared her for extradition, so we agree with the United States case that there should be a case here in Canada allowing extradition. So the first step was, does Canada agree that the United States has a case? And that's what this was. They agree. Yes, it looks like, if these allegations are proven true, that this is cause for extradition. So that step happened this week. And the very next day, after Canada said, okay, we agree with the evidence that's been put forward by the United States, we can now move forward with the extradition court case. And China instantly responded, and they said, oh yeah, well, those two guys that we've captured, and we didn't tell you why we've got them and why we're torturing them, we now have dirt on them, and we are charging them with spying and knowing state secrets.
Of course.
And so, okay, what were they spying about? And the problem is, in the Chinese government, they can decide anything is a government secret. And as soon as they say this is a government secret, then it is. And so Michael Spavak, who is one of the two that's been arrested, he actually works for a nonprofit organization, and he used to be a diplomat. And so technically, he still should have had diplomatic immunity. Well, they picked him off the streets because he works for a human rights organization, and guess who violates a lot of human rights, right? The Chinese government, and he was investigating into that. All they have to say is one of the places that he was investigating into is a state secret. Now he is a spy.
Oh man, that's crazy, Matt. I'm fascinated to see how this is going to move forward. I read another article about China that's getting a little bit of heat. So they have a social credit system that we had talked about previously, but we're finally getting the numbers out of China, and it turns out that 23 million people were banned in the last year from buying travel tickets because their score was too low. So to catch our podcasters up on this, it's kind of like a credit score. You know how in order to buy a house, you need a credit score of like over 700, over 650. Same kind of thing. So how do you get a good credit score? You pay your bills. You stay on top of it. You don't miss payment. In China, they're saying that in order to have a good credit system there, you need to stay trustworthy. They say that not paying your taxes will bump your credit system down. Spreading false information on their version of Twitter and Facebook will bump you down. And so to me, that's kind of a violation of freedom of speech.
Yeah, and they get to decide what's false information.
Right, and that's almost unfair, right? I mean,
totally
you
unfair.
Caught just chatting, you know.
State secret.
The other thing is taking drugs. So if you end up in the hospital and you need and you're on a heroin overdose and they need to administer drugs, then your social system's going to get banged down. One thing that's really frustrating about this system is there are a lot of minority groups, especially in northern China, that seem to be hurt a lot by this. And you're probably going to find that the misfits and the lower class, they're probably the ones that are going to be banned, which only makes the rich richer because they can travel, they can do their commerce, they can trade. And then the people that have messed up, it stops them and stunts them from traveling and trading. And so I think you're going to see an even bigger class difference, which is ironic because they're all about communism and inequality. So I don't really understand where they're coming from.
I totally agree with you. But hey, that's politics. We're not talking ideology. We're talking politics and holding on to power.
Right.
So
okay. Yeah, so I thought that was interesting. 17.7 million people were banned from buying a flight somewhere. 5.5 million were banned from purchasing a high-speed train ticket. I mean, this is a big deal. If I were in that situation, I would move out of China, go to Australia,
but
somewhere close by.
You can't get on a plane or a train. Maybe a boat.
A boat. I'm getting in a boat and I'm going to Sydney. Okay, so before we end the podcast, I have one more thing I wanted to talk about. Tesla's Model 3 is finally freaking $35,000. This is so exciting for me. I'm the type of person that always has a beat-up junker car. Matt, tell us about your car that you had when you were in college. Do you remember that little brown car that was so terrible that you'd take girls on dates and you'd have to like push it to start it? And remember when it was so cold you had to hold down a button and also push the gas at the same time? I tried to borrow that thing several times and could never get it started.
Yes, it was a 1982 diesel Jetta, and I bought it for $500.
From who?
I bought it from Randy Simpson, our neighbor who lived behind us. So kitty corner.
What?
Yeah, he used it because he commuted often. I think he worked for New Skin at the time, which was like a multi-level marketing health vitamin thing out of Utah. So he bought this car that could go super cheap to Utah, and then when he was tired of it, he's like, "Hey Matt, you want to buy this car for $500?" And I was like, "Yes."
All I remember is when it finally died, Dad tied it to the back of our minivan. And I remember he said, okay, you need to drive it behind me, even though didn't have any power. So he was basically towing
Yeah.
it. And
Joe blew it up. It was Joe. So I was working on the road and Joe wanted to borrow my car and then the head gasket blew. Not the head gasket because
oh,
it's a diesel, the head of the diesel engine blew.
sure, sure.
And it was my fault because I knew the timing chain needed to be fixed. Our mechanic told me that, and it's totally my fault. But I was on the road, and when I came back from working on the road, Joe's like, "So blew up your car, and we donated it. Here's the $50 tax break you
Yeah,
get for
car for
donating it."
kids.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so picture this. Your car had blown up. I don't know if you were still on the road, but Dad wanted to get rid of it and take it to the junkyard. So in order to do that, he had me go in the driver's seat in the car as he towed it down Baseline Road with this tiny string attached to the minivan. I'm
String.
driving, and thankfully the brakes work, but all of a
Yeah.
sudden the steering wheel locks and
No.
wait. So he's pulling
Sucks because
me.
it's not on.
It almost flipped the car and I almost died. So that's what happens when you buy a $500 car. Now, speaking of cheap cars, this Tesla is now $35,000, which is a lot more expensive than your old car. But it's pretty cool. I mean, it has most of the things that you'd want.
Mhm.
It goes for 220 miles on the charge, which is
Yeah,
awesome.
that's
I mean,
330 kilometers.
I drive a lot, and my Corolla goes for about 350 miles, and that usually gets me through the week. And I go, to Ventura County, Orange County, LA County. I'm driving every day, all the time, and it gives me quite a few days. So if you had that in a charge, you could just charge it in your garage at night and get
Yeah.
pretty much anywhere you needed to for a commute. I mean, if you're going to Vegas or somewhere, you'd have to stop, but that's pretty decent, I think.
Yeah, for a daily commuter, I think it's fantastic. And as you mentioned earlier, I did put $1,000 down to get this $35,000 Tesla, oh, like 3, 4 years ago. And it's been what I've been waiting for. And what's interesting is you will have anxiety because it's not the big full battery, but it sounds like they're actually going to install the full battery. So if you want to upgrade it, it's a matter of putting in a phone call to Tesla, paying your money, and then they'll unlock the rest of the battery for you. Now, don't quote me on it, but it sounds like that's what they're doing. And it's the same thing with the autopilot features. You can, to get the $35,000 base value, I think it's very basic autopilot. I don't even know if you've got lane assist with that. But if you wanted to upgrade it, it's a matter of a quick phone call. All the hardware is already there and all they do is turn it on. So this has actually caused some problems with Tesla's share price this week. Did you
Oh yeah.
watch what happened?
It went down 1% when after they announced it, right?
It did, and it continued to go down even after it had dropped that first percent. I think it dropped another 2 or 3%. And the reason is because they're using all of these premium components so that the Model 3 goes through the factory basically the same. There are going to be a few more things on the nicer models, but they want to keep it as uniform as possible. And then you just order the upgrades later on. And in one way, that's genius because now you don't have to set up multiple lines in the factory. And so that will save on tooling and getting the cars manufactured.
And
And
it's
it's
nice to know that if you, run into some money later with a tax refund or whatever, you could,
yeah, you
okay, now
upgrade.
I'm gonna buy the extra battery or whatever.
Right. So the sale isn't final. And I think that's also genius, right? Somebody gets into their car, they have a little bit of range anxiety, a quick phone call, 10 grand later, you've got a better battery, right? So,
Well, it looks to me like it's actually $2,000 for the extra battery pack, and
oh,
it looks like it only gives you 20 extra miles. If one of our users knows differently, just let us know in the comments here. But that might be nice to know that you have another 20 miles, and I think it improves your acceleration speed too. which is
Yes.
pretty cool.
And they're constantly sending out updates. In fact, the last update I read about was for all of Tesla's cars. So that's the S and the X and and it did give them, I believe it was an extra 5 to 10% range on all the batteries that are already out there. Or actually, I think it was anything manufactured from 2016 forward. So that was just a free over the air. By the way, everybody's got another 10%. And just
Sweet.
because they figured out how to tweak and
Get more
adjust.
efficient.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Before we end, I just want to tell you the coolest part about this new thing. You buy all of the Teslas now online, which is a lot simpler than going into a dealership, I think. Sad though for the dealership people that had jobs there. That's all part of automation and part of the frustrating thing about technology. But they will actually allow you to test drive the
Mm.
car, so you can quite literally buy a Tesla, drive it for several hundred miles with your friends on a weekend trip to Vegas, and then return it for free. And that's on
Really?
Tesla's website. Yeah.
Oh, that's great to know because I have liked the idea that I can go down to Calgary where they actually have a showroom and I can test drive a vehicle, and now it's going to disappear. Another thing that people were concerned about is getting their vehicles serviced. So even though Tesla doesn't need to be, these cars don't need to be serviced as much because they have far less components.
No oil or anything, right?
Right, but they'll still have like steering fluids
Sure.
and brakes that need to be checked. So there's still going to be some servicing. And in that case, apparently Tesla's stepping up where they are going to give you not just same day servicing, but like they're going to try to get within the hour. So if you're in a major metropolis and you're like, hey, my brakes are freezing up on me, they're going to send out a technician right there and should be able to get to you within the hour. So that those are the types of things they're doing to try to ease people's concerns about the fact that they don't have a dealership that they can take the car to.
Hey, that's cool. Well, if you ask me, I'm going to stick with my Corolla for now until I have $35,000 to blow.
My Corolla.
But until next week, thank you so much for joining us. And please give us a 5-star rating on the iTunes store. We would love that. If you're on YouTube, go ahead and subscribe to us and send us a comment. We love to hear from you each and every week.
Talk to you next week.